Thank you all for joining us this morning for our joint town hall. Today, you guys are in for quite the treat. We are going to discuss a very complex tax bill that you know as HB581. And also, I have the honor of presenting to you my first budget as your CEO of DeKalb County, Georgia. I want to thank you all for being here. I don't see any other electeds, but of course, I always like to acknowledge our Board of Commissioners that serve alongside me. Commissioner Robert Patrick for District 1, Commissioner Michelle Long Spears, District 2, District 3, Commissioner Nicole Messiah, District 4, Commissioner Shakira Johnson. District 5, we have Commissioner Marita Davis Johnson. District 6, Commissioner Ted Terry. And of course, District 7 is Commissioner Ladina Bolton. They serve as a part of our governing authority. And many of the decisions that you see here will come down to a board vote. But as we're taking those votes, your opinions are very important, and we want you to be informed of what is going on. We will begin today with the public hearing item, which is House Bill 581. And today I have with me to discuss the House bill. We'll start with TJ Sigler. TJ Sigler is currently the DeKalb County Director of Office of Management and Budget. TJ has been with DeKalb County since 2018. He has a total of 14 years in a variety of roles with the Board of Commissioners, the CEO's office, and the OMB office. He also worked for Carl Vinson Institute of Government at the University of Georgia for 3 years, and he holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Alabama and a master in public administration from the University of Georgia. He is a proud resident of DeKalb County, where he lives with his wife and children. Additionally, we have with us here today to discuss HB 581, one of our DeKalb County attorneys. We have DeKalb County Attorney Terry Phillips, and he is the Deputy County Attorney in our law department. And he provides advice and counsel for city officials as well as boards and departments, including the CEO's office, the Board of Commissioners, and for financial matters concerning Treasury, as well as Board of Registration and Elections, Public Safety, Public Works, Human Resources, Finance, Purchasing and Contracting, and Public Information Office. Highlights of his practice include supervising the elections team, the county's response to the coronavirus pandemic, as well as SPLOST and eHost. He deals with blight remediation, litigation, as well as media relations and compliance with open records and open meeting requirements. He also manages intergovernmental relations and contracting with federal, state, and local governmental agencies. Also, we have taken him from the Gold Dome this morning, Mr. Dan Baskerville, and Dan is with Denton's. He specializes in state and local governmental affairs, and he has over 20 years of experience. Denton's is the official firm of record that is associated with our legislative priorities for DeKalb County, and he has extensive experience and knowledge in local government issues, especially in relation to local governments within the metro Atlanta area. Mr. Baskerville concentrates on assisting clients on governmental affairs and at all levels of state government. He represents a wide variety of interests for Georgia with the General Assembly, and these interests include everything from transportation to environmental issues, education, economic development, financial, health care, and local government. So thank you so much, Dan, for taking the time to come down and join us this morning. And last but not least, we have with us DeKalb County's Chief Operating Officer, Zachary Williams. Zach has an MPA, and he serves as our Chief Operating Officer, where he oversees the daily operations of DeKalb County. He reports to both the CEO's office as well as the Board of Commissioners, as outlined within the Org Act of DeKalb County. He has a distinguished career in public service, and he's held leadership roles in counties and municipalities across the Southeast. Prior to joining DeKalb, he was the city manager for Fulton County, where he led capital improvement projects. Also, he has worked nationally and been recognized in health equity initiatives. His past roles include Assistant County Administrator for Broward County, Florida, and Assistant City Manager of Coral Gables, Florida. And he is a credentialed manager by the International City and County Management Association. He has a BS degree in criminal justice and a master's in public administration from Cal State University, Long Beach. Before we take a deep dive, I'll give you a little bit of information on HB581. Let me say that it was actually signed into law in April of 2024, but it became effective January 1st. And what we have now is a statewide floating exemption. And it literally focuses on the Georgia Revenue and Tax Code. And it is a very complex law. Since I've been there, it has continued to evolve as we take a deep dive. But what it does overall is it creates a statewide homestead exemption. Now, many of you that are sitting here, all of you are DeKalb County residents, I'm pretty sure, and you're familiar with our homestead. But this creates a statewide homestead exemption, and it allows each county to opt in or opt out. It has been nicknamed FLOST, meaning floating local option sales tax. And at this time, we need to make a decision. So what we're holding in order to keep all options available to us, in order to opt out, it requires that there are 3 meetings that are held, public hearings, and that allows you to opt out. However, we have not made a determination at this time. It will come to a formal vote of the Board of Commissioners, but we want you to understand what opting in means as well as opting out. So today we'll have that conversation, and we will begin with a series of slides to walk you through House Bill 581. So if we can go to the monitors. Great. And at this time, we will have Attorney Terry Phillips come up and walk us through HB 581.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Madam CEO. I will fast forward. Our CEO has covered the initial points about our decision as a county. I would like to start by introducing some of the key terms that you will hear as this bill is discussed by our commission and in the media and by others. I know not all of us follow these terms, so I think it's important that we're all understanding exactly what we're referring to. A homestead exemption is a reduction in the property tax the qualified homeowner would pay. Property owners in DeKalb can apply for a homestead. If they are granted that homestead, they would enjoy the reduction from an exemption. A base year homestead exemption is where there is a freeze to your property value at the point that you obtain the initial homestead. And then as your property value goes up, you get a discount in the taxes paid because you're not paying taxes on that increased value as the property value goes up. A local option sales tax is a percentage, typically 1 cent, 1%, sometimes as low as half a cent, but it is a sales tax on tangible personal property. It has to be approved by referendum by the voters, and that sales tax on personal property or services is then used by the county government. And you'll hear those terms as we describe it. It's important to note up front, DeKalb County has an existing base year homestead tax exemption. HB 581, this House bill, creates a statewide base year homestead exemption, as our CEO explained to us. And the freeze created by the bill will start with values in 2024. So if that is applied, The value of one's home and property in 2024 is what would be used. The statewide exemption will limit annual assessment increases on homestead properties as I described, but the state's version allows an inflation rate increase. When that will happen is up to the state. The Georgia Department of Revenue would dictate that, and the amount would be dictated by the Georgia Department of Revenue as well. The 2007 existing base year homestead tax exemption that DeKalb has freezes property values as early as 2006. The House bill requires the tax commissioner, should DeKalb opt in, to apply the freeze that is most beneficial to the property owner. So DeKalb would in fact have two tax exemptions, the floating tax exemption from the state, as well as the existing base year tax exemption that DeKalb has as of 2007. And the tax commissioner is obligated to provide really what amounts to the best exemption, the most beneficial one, the largest exemption to the property owner. It's important to know that HB 581 provides an automatic exemption. If the county takes no further action at all, that exemption would apply in DeKalb County. DeKalb has to exercise the right procedure to opt out. And as I've said, the tax commissioner must apply the base year exemption that is most beneficial. I emphasize that because DeKalb may find itself in a space where both exemptions apply, and it's important that property owners understand how it will be determined which one applies to their property. The opt-out procedure, as our CEO explained, it requires advertising that there will be public hearings. The advertising has gone in the newspaper. It was also done by press release and posting on the website. It is important to note that my understanding from the leadership in DeKalb is this was to preserve the option only. The law requires that the notices say intent to opt out. So that legally required language has been used, but the final decision has not been made. And this is an opportunity for everyone to give input in these public hearings to our elected officials so they consider what the public wants. You conduct the 3 public hearings, as you know, and then following all of that, the county would have to adopt an opt-out resolution. That resolution that is passed by the county, should the county commission elect to do so, along with proof of the 3 public hearings and proper advertising, all has to be submitted to the Secretary of State by March 1st in order to complete the opt-out process. The schedule that we have at this time includes this public hearing as the first one. There will be another on the evening of the 24th. I would like to give a little more info just to be clear and for the benefit of everyone. The public hearing on the 24th will take place at the Porter Sanford Performing Arts facility, and that is in Decatur. And then the third one will happen on February 25th at Sam Street, and that hearing is going to be a part of the commission's regularly scheduled meeting next Tuesday, so it'll be at 10 o'clock. The Porter Sanford one on Monday will be at 6 p.m. because one of the meetings has to be held in the evening. You see the schedule there. If the board elects to pass a resolution to submit, it would happen at the February 25th board meeting. There is also a local option sales tax created. That is what's been nicknamed FLOST, which means floating local option sales tax. It's a nickname because the bill creates a floating exemption. That sales tax is either a penny or a half cent. It would be levied if there were a referendum passed, but there's also a requirement, as you can see on the screen, that all of the cities also past that as well. It's my understanding Decatur, the city of Decatur, has already opted out, and there may be a chance that DeKalb will not have an opportunity to participate in this tax because of what the cities do. But that's yet to be determined. We'll figure that out as the facts evolve and we move forward. The most important thing I can tell you, having described the bill very briefly and quickly to you, is that this is a business decision, and DeKalb must decide to take advantage of this statewide homestead, or they must complete the opt-out process, and we'll find out the commission's decision on the 25th in their board meeting. Those items have already been placed on their agenda. That was announced in the committee of the whole meeting this past Tuesday. But we thank you for coming, and I hope that was helpful.
Good morning. So I'm TJ Sigler. I'm the Director of the Office of Management and Budget. And for my portion of the presentation, I'm going to focus in on the floating homestead exemption and how it compares to our current base year exemption. So Madam CEO and Mr. Phillips went over, all the details of the bill, so I'm not going to rehash all that. I just want to reiterate a couple things. So the decision to opt in or opt out is about the floating homestead exemption. And we already have a homestead exemption that functions similar to the floating homestead exemption. So our analysis is a little bit different than some of the other cities or taxing jurisdictions that are looking at this, because we have that current exemption. It will remain in place whether we opt in or opt out. And we believe in many cases that's going to be the more beneficial exemption for taxpayers rather than the floating homestead exemption. So that will likely be what applies to your tax bills, even if we were opted into this floating homestead exemption. All right, and so the current homestead exemption, the what we call the property assessment freeze, is available to anyone who has a homestead exemption in DeKalb County. It was first introduced, I think, in 2007. So if you've owned your home since that time or before that time, you'll want to make sure that you have that applied to your homestead exemption, and I'll show you on the tax bill where you'd be able to check that. But if you've applied for and received a homestead exemption since that time, the freeze will automatically apply to your homestead exemption as well. And so the way that works again is the first year that freeze is applied to your property, that is what's referred to as the base year. And then as the property value, if your assessment increases, the value of that exemption increases as well. So basically, for county taxes, you would not be paying additional taxes based on any appreciation in your assessed values. Okay, and this table just compares the two. So the effective date for the property assessment freeze, the current one, as I said, was in 2007. So the base year for that, depending on when you first had that applied, could go as far back as 2006. For the floating homestead exemption, if that goes into effect, the effective date of that is this year, so 2025, and the earliest base year value would be 2024. So for the expiration, there's no expiration date for the floating homestead exemption. Our current property assessment freeze is linked somewhat to our our EHOS, which is a sales tax. So as long as our EHOS remains in effect, it will remain in effect. If our EHOS expires, then there would have to be a renewal of the property assessment freeze, which would be, again, through an act of the state legislature and then a referendum. But the earliest that could possibly occur would be in 2020 or 2033. So, and then the base value, as I said, it depends on when it was first applied. But an important distinction between these two is for the current base value freeze, it can increase. So it's a fixed value. Once you have that established, that is the base year value. Where under the floating homestead exemption, it does have the ability to increase based on inflation on an annual basis. And again, that's determined by the state revenue commissioner. Okay, and this is just an example of one of the county tax bills. and I wanted to point out, one, how you can see whether you have the freeze and how that is applied to your taxes. So if you notice in that red box there, it has an exemption code that says H1F. So if you look at that and it has an F designation on your homestead exemption, that means that you have the freeze. And right below that, you see the base assessment freeze at $95,640, and then the net frozen exemption at $38,660. So what that net frozen exemption is the difference between the base year value and the current assessed value. So the current assessed value for this property was $134,300 based on the appeal. And so the difference between that and the $95,640 is the value of the exemption. Okay, and then when you look at the part of the tax bill that breaks down your tax liability, that column that I outlined in red there shows how much you would save from the frozen exemption. So for this property, the savings was $804 from their property taxes. One other thing I'll point out here is that you'll see that the exemption applies to the county taxes. It does not apply to school taxes, or depending on which city you live in, it may or may not apply to your city taxes. And really that depends on your city, and it's actually a separate exemption from the county exemption. All right, so just to wrap up, the bottom line, what does this mean for DeKalb County? So one, what does it mean for our budget? We really think the impact's going to be revenue neutral, or if there is any impact, it's going to be very, very small, just due to the fact that we currently have a base property assessment freeze, which is actually probably more generous to taxpayers than the floating homestead exemption. There may be some additional costs associated with the floating homestead exemption, just for the tax commissioner and the property appraisal department to be able to track that exemption as well. And then what does it mean for taxpayers? So again, whether we decide to opt in or opt out of the floating homestead exemption, the base assessment freeze exemption will remain in place until at least 2033, and there is the option to renew that as well. And as well, you would also continue to receive the benefit of the EHOS, which is a property tax, or excuse me, a sales tax that provides property tax relief for homeowners through 2029. All right, and that concludes my portion of the presentation. So last slide here has the link to the budget office website that has information about the budget, which we'll go over a little bit later in this meeting, as well as HB581. And then the second link here is to the tax commissioner's office, where you can look up your property tax bill to see whether or not you have the homestead freeze exemption. And it also has contact information for applying for any of the homestead exemptions that you might qualify for.
Thank you so much, Mr. Siegler. At this time, I'm going to ask Dan Baskerville to come forward with Denton's. It is very important that you understand that DeKalb County is unique as it relates to HB 581 on the county side of the aisle. Because one thing that the new legislation does, it puts a cap on the amount at 2 cents for the county. And currently, our MARTA tax rises us above the 2 cent cap. So down at the Capitol, understanding that it disproportionately affects DeKalb out of all 159 counties, we have already lobbied to have our MARTA tax excluded so that it doesn't count towards the 2 cent cap. So at this time, I would like for Mr. Baskerville to explain more in terms of his efforts, because we are unique in that we already have e-host and we already have a freeze that gives back to DeKalb County residents to help offset your liability associated with your property values. So we want to do what is most beneficial. But of course, now we have HB 581 before us. So if you will, Mr. Baskerville, please have that conversation to better help the residents understand.
Sure, and let me, thank you, Madam CEO, and let me talk about, divide it into two parts. I don't have a formal presentation here, but just to on the presentations that Mr. Phillips and Mr. Siegler have given about the opt-out, there is one piece of legislation dealing with that down at the legislature right now. It's called House Bill 92. It just passed the House this week, and it's looking at several unintended consequences from a bill that was so large and so complex as 581, dealing with whether they should give a longer amount of time for cities and counties to decide whether to opt out or opt in. Right now, they've already had 3 different versions of the bill, and the one that passed the House this last week would say you have until the end of March of this year to decide whether to opt out, or if you've already opted out, it would let you opt back in, like, say, the city of Decatur, which has apparently opted out, they could opt back in, because the goal, the legislature has made it very clear, is that they want people to be in this homestead exemption, more so for ones that don't have a freeze like DeKalb County has. As to the other issue mentioned by the CEO about DeKalb and its 2% cap and an unintended consequence that happened in 581 that made the MARTA tax, which was unexempt, that was another unintended consequence, and that's a different part of the code. That's the sales tax code, and we're working with leadership down at the Capitol to correct that, because it was an unintended consequence, and make sure that that issue is resolved and it goes back to the way it was before 581. But make it clear that has nothing to do whether the county opts out or not, or stays with the tax that's in it. So that is a separate issue, but it's another one we're working on to make the county whole, because the county's MARTA tax is a little different from other counties, and some people didn't understand that, so we're working to correct that.
Thank you so much, Dan. At this time, we will move right into our segment, but before we do so, we may go over by a few minutes, but I do think it's important to allow questions from the floor, because I can see some of the faces, and I understand the complexity, because after walking in on January 1st, it has continued to evolve. This has been done statewide, and as you can see, oftentimes what happens with the municipalities and the counties is it is an unfunded mandate, or it has unintended consequences, because it's not a law over which we had control. So this was actually signed in April of 2024 to become effective January 1st, and it requires all 159 counties to take action. Now, for counties that had no tax freeze, this may be wonderful, but for DeKalb County, because we were unique, it creates, I love the word that Mr. Baskerville used, unintended consequences, and we must navigate through those. But for you and for me, because I'm also a resident of DeKalb County, the best part is that we have the option to choose what is most beneficial to the residents. And at this time, we believe our current freeze is that. Now, I did see hands go up, and I don't want to, delay. Yes, sir. And if you will, please stand. I'll join you in standing. Sorry. Thank you.
Oh, I can talk loud. I'm from Philly. Go Eagles. As my friend's son would say, I'm confuzzled. I understand the revenue. I understand the benefits to the county. But my question is, it seems to me what's best for a resident is based on what base year they have. Is that correct? Like, if someone has a base year from 2006, it seems to me it's better for them to stick with what they've got than to go with the new program. So
that would typically be correct.
okay.
So, and what would happen is, even if we were opted in to the floating homestead exemption, the law says that the tax commissioner who bills the taxes must apply whichever exemption is more beneficial to the taxpayer.
As long as you were opted in.
Correct. Correct. So, and if we're opted out, then it would just be the current, which in most cases would be, more beneficial to taxpayers anyways.
Is there another question? Okay, no problem, and thank you for your service. Okay, now if we can read it. I think that would be great.
My name is Ray Merced, and my wife and I, we own a house here. I may have turned it off. Testing. My name is Ray Merced. My wife and I have been owning a house for over 25 years in DeKalb County. My thing is, have we done an economic impact study on both ways to get the better numbers? See, and that's what I'm looking at, because what's at stake here is business, schools, our property values, So really, we're walking a real tightrope. I would like to see it stay the same, where basically we have a homestead exemption that evens the playing field, because not everybody's a homeowner. We pay over 60% in school taxes, my wife and I. Everybody here that has a home does that. See, the homestead exemption freeze levels the playing field. See, it keeps us on track, where basically we're not taken advantage of. There's not a disparity, There are people that rent condos that have families that mirror the homeowners. See, those families, they're not paying school taxes. It's only the valuation of the property that they live in. See, and we have to level the playing field, and this also gives us the advantage. So I would like to say that we can stay the way it is, right, and weather this state law and preserve ourselves to make sure that we have a level playing field. There are people that don't have homes, that don't own homes, but pay sales tax. So there has to be a balance there. And I hope that we can get through with this. Thank you.
Thank you for those statements. And again, this is unique for DeKalb because of the exemption we already have that saves our residents a substantial amount of money compared to other jurisdictions. So when you speak of homeowners, because that is who it affects based upon the property value, unfortunately, we don't have the option to do nothing, or actually we do, and that's called opting in. But that is why we want to bring it to you, because regardless, there will be a consequence, whether we opt in or out. And currently, in DeKalb County, our homestead exemption is more beneficial to the taxpayer, to the homeowner, to our residents. So I want you to give us credit. We got it right. And now, on the state level, there is a movement towards doing, in a sense, what we do. But it has different consequences for us because of what we already have. And I would also ask if any of the panel members have anything else that you wish to add to the statement or the comment that was just made. Okay. And yes, ma'am, go right ahead.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to understand a little bit, if we already have a homestead exemption, what is the benefit to the state for putting something like this in place? Like, why is it happening if we already have one and probably other counties do too?
Well, because they have the authority. What goes on under the Gold Dome, honestly, we have no control over. When certain legislation is presented, we have our representatives there. We're on the front end, but that doesn't mean when it comes down to a vote that it happens as we desire. Now, I'm very happy to stand here and say that there has been an acknowledgement, even from the author of the bill, that they did not realize it would have a disproportionate effect on DeKalb. So as a result, we have asked that there is language correction that would exempt our penny so that it does not count against us. And when I say our penny, I'm referring directly to the MARTA penny that had previously been exempt. So I would ask Mr. Baskerville, do you have anything else to add to what I've just said?
Just one thing. In relation to why are they putting, since we already have a homestead freeze in DeKalb, why are they putting it on? The way they looked at it is, well, if you already have one, that's the one that stays in place. So we're not really doing anything to counties, because there are others around the state that have it. That they're just trying to encourage other people who don't to do what DeKalb is already doing. And DeKalb, as has been mentioned before, is already a stronger exemption than what the state is doing. So it almost, at this point, it doesn't really have an impact on DeKalb from the homestead exemption standpoint.
Yes.
If I could add one other comment to help with that. Not only is this bill applicable to the 159 counties in the state of Georgia, it applies to all the cities and all the school districts as well.
Okay.
So there are quite a few government agencies, when you think of every independent school district, every municipality, and the 159 counties on top of that, all having to make a decision about this, and not all of them have a tax exemption in place now.
Understood. Okay, that helps, because the clarifying question was, how does it benefit the state to put this in place versus leaving it at the county level? But you answered that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm slightly confused because the terminology has seemed to switch back and forth. Is it the assessment that is frozen or the exemption that is frozen?
So I'll try to clarify that, because it does get confusing, because I think what kind of the common terminology is, we call it the assessment freeze. But actually your assessment is not frozen. What it does is it creates that base year value, and then it provides you an exemption on your taxes based on any appreciation or any increase in your assessed value versus what the base value is. So it's really an exemption, but the exemption grows as your assessed value increases.
So the question is, so opting in would give us two options essentially, right? The state level or the county, and the county can override, and whichever one is more beneficial is what you would go with. So what would be, I guess, the issue if we opt in? I guess is it the unintended consequences? Because it gives us an alternative option, because if the state is lower, you're obligated to apply the state, and if the county's lower, you would apply the county, which that stays in place, it doesn't change it. So if you can clarify, I guess, what would be the issue of opting in?
So that is really the question, and that's kind of the question that's posed to the Board of Commissioners, because they'll be the ones voting on this. I believe, and I don't want to speak for her, but Madam CEO's position is that there's no harm in opting in. So, because what would occur then is, just like we said, the tax commissioner, and it's really not a discretionary decision, that the governing authority has anything to do with. The tax commissioner, based on law, has to apply whichever exemption is more beneficial to taxpayers. And so what opting in would do is it would mean that if for whatever reason the current exemption were to expire, that the floating homestead exemption then would be there as sort of a fallback option. But ultimately, that is going to be the decision, what's going to be voted on at the meeting on the 25th by the Board of Commissioners, whether to opt in or opt out.
Yes, I'm very concerned about the MARTA tax, and does it appear that will be corrected? I mean, if we're unable to collect the MARTA tax, and what's going to happen? I just think that's a disaster.
So either way, you'll be able to collect the MARTA tax. The MARTA tax will not go away. The question is, whether the county stays under the 2% cap so it can continue to issue the e-host and the SPLOST, because the state has a 2% cap, which the MARTA tax was exempt from previously. And what we're doing is working to get it back the way it was. Again, there's no immediate impact on that because the current SPLOST doesn't expire till, but the MARTA tax will continue to be levied. This doesn't impact that at all, if that was your question.
Okay, this stems from his question. So if there is an option to, if let's say we opt in as a county, and you said that it can expire, the current assessment can expire later, like, do we get to vote on that again to keep it in place? That's what I'm confused about, because if we opt in, what happens where the current model expires, and then we're only using the floating model at that point?
What you've said is absolutely correct. 2033, I believe, we're good until 2033. But after 2023, then we would default to the state FLOST. Is that correct?
And there's no opportunity to vote again to prevent that from taking place?
I mean, the way that whatever the correct terminology is, assessment freeze or the homestead, not to confuse people with that, but the current freeze that's in place that doesn't allow the property taxes to increase from what you bought the property at, that was originally done years ago as local legislation. So the legislature, our delegation, could again adopt such legislation and put it to a referendum, because that's how it happened in the first place. So you could put that back in place again if it was the will of the legislature and the voters.
And after this, we're going to have to move into the budget presentation in lieu of time. But ma'am, go right ahead.
My question is that I received the notice that the Decatur school systems decided to opt out of the homestead exemption. What does that mean to the people who currently have a homestead exemption? Because I know we don't pay school taxes, and it was based on our income and stuff. And if I have to pay it, it's going to be a disaster.
I mean, I will, if either of these gentlemen have anything to add, but as a resident of the city of Decatur who pays those city of Decatur school taxes, I'm aware of that, and that doesn't change anything, really. And what was referred to up here is if any cities opt out, that you couldn't do this other floss tax, but it doesn't, what the school boards doesn't affect the county. So the quick answer is for city of Decatur taxpayers, because that's the only people who are impacted by city of Decatur taxes or city of Decatur school taxes, there's no change because they opted out, so they basically opted to stay with the current taxing system in the city of Decatur for that school district. So that won't impact you whatsoever.
Well, if I could just add just a little bit to that. So part of what makes this topic confusing for a lot of people is that there are multiple homestead exemptions that exist, and multiple ones even for different taxing jurisdictions. And so depending on where you live in the county, you know, if you live in a city versus unincorporated, if you live in state of Atlanta or state of Decatur, you know, you pay taxes to different school systems, potentially you pay taxes to cities, and they all have different exemptions that may apply. But opting out of this, you know, whoever opts out of this exemption has no effect on your current exemptions. Those would remain in place.
Okay, thank you so much. We are going to now move into the second segment of the presentation today, and this is a budget presentation. And upon walking into DeKalb County on January 2nd, and thank you so much, Mr. Baskerville is getting back down to the Capitol to keep his eye on what happens down there. And we certainly need him to do so because bills change and they evolve each and every day. and watchful eyes are important under the Gold Dome. So thank you for coming. But as I was saying, upon walking through the doors of DeKalb County on January 2nd, I had 11 days to prepare a $1.8 billion budget that covers 58 different funds. And I'd like to acknowledge Mr. T.J. Siegler for working alongside me, because many departments had already sent over, of course, their budgetary requests. So we have uploaded our budget online. You can go there and you can actually view it, because this is your money. Our budget is comprised of taxpayer dollars, and it's very important that you understand how we choose to spend taxpayer money. So what you will see here for the fiscal year 2025 is a balanced budget with few adjustments. A budget, as far as I'm concerned, is a direct reflection of the priorities of the person who creates it. So for me, coming in at the time that I did, it represents what I consider a starting point as I begin to reimagine DeKalb. So it allows us to continue current funding levels to ensure that we're operational, but we took a very flat approach to the budget for this year. Now, there are some reasons that we chose to do this, and that primarily is because over the course of the next 6 months, we will begin a series of reviews. In the budget that we currently have, I am requesting that we have a pay and classification study. For those of you who are here, you may have become aware that with our last BOC meeting, I presented, or actually Committee of Whole, a recommendation to make DeKalb County police officers amongst the highest paid in the state of Georgia. So what I found is it's time for us to have pay and classification studies. I believe that charity starts at home and then spreads abroad. So it's time that we review all of our departments. We ensure that people are paid a fair wage for what they do, and we bring salaries in line with expectations. So with the current approach, it allows a pay and classification study. Also, we're having a countywide operational assessment done. And we are looking currently at 6 different departments. And I'm going to attempt to go through them all. Our OMB, Office of Management and Budget, which includes procurement. We are also reviewing the Public Safety Department. Planning and Sustainability is being reviewed. We are also taking a very careful look at organizational and operational effects across the county to ensure that we have best practices in place for how we do business. We're also doing an in-depth technology review, because in DeKalb County, for many years, we have not invested the revenue that I believe is necessary for technology. So with the operational assessments, we have brought in Malden Jenkins. They will go into the various departments. They will ask a series of questions, review current policy, procedures, job descriptions, as well as budgets. And then they will come back and make formal recommendations for ways that we can enhance or build upon what is already in place that works. We are also doing a fine and fee analysis. Fine and fees. That primarily deals with our court systems, but across DeKalb in planning and sustainability and in our business office. If you've ever used those services, there are fees. After taking office and during conversations in the transition, I realized that in certain departments, we have not updated fees in 10 to 15 years. So DeKalb County, keep in mind, besides tax revenue, we work with the revenue we generate. So we've not kept in line with the cost of delivery of goods and services. So by having this fee and fine analysis, we are comparing DeKalb County's fees to other jurisdictions, just as we did with our police department, and we will adjust our fees so that we are charging fees that are in line with what is standard across the metro area. Also, we have an updated cost allocation study. And how many of you in here live within a city? Because DeKalb County has 12 cities, okay? Chamblee, Dunwoody, Doraville, Stone Mountain, Stonecrest, Lithonia, Pine Lake, Clarkston, Decatur. Hope I didn't leave out anyone. Tucker. Thank you. Thank you. And Tucker. So with the cost allocation study, you know, increasingly, and rightfully so, people expect more. But many of our intergovernmental agreements that we've signed have not been revisited since the city came online. And during the past 10, 15 years, DeKalb County has absorbed rises in the cost of the delivery of services. So what we're looking at is what we're assessing and what we're paying to determine what is equitable for the delivery of service. So that is what the cost allocation study will do. I want to ensure that we're meeting everyone's expectations, but I want to be very clear, and even many of you saw me within 3 days, I had a federal lawsuit from the DOJ. Within another 5, I had a 30-inch water main break. And then the week after that, we had an ice storm. So there's never a loss of things to do here, and they come at you really quick. But as it relates to the cost allocation study, it is just imperative. And one thing that I've found, and even, you know, as a citizen, because what I do affects me too, I've not seen people upset about paying a fair rate for a service. They expect good service delivery. So once these findings come in, we will share them with you, as well as our cities, and we'll sit down and talk about it and make sure that we're collecting enough to deliver what is needed of us. And also, we are funding within this budget a facilities master plan. Across DeKalb, I want to make sure that we are upkeeping facilities, not just acquiring, but upkeep is just as important as acquisition. So sometimes, as a woman, you have to stop, go back before we go forward. So with this facilities master plan, we can determine buildings that are in need of remediation and repairs. And we will then create a priority list, and we will set about getting those buildings and structures in order. So as we move forward, I want to share this because this is very important. Currently, as we move forward, in our general fund, we have $43.6 million. And that is slightly less than the operational reserve required for 1 month of operation of DeKalb County. And that's problematic for me because even if you're home, you should have more than 1 month of reserve in your account. So I have taken action to create a 4-year plan that will get us to a point where we should have a minimum of 4 months of reserve for DeKalb County to operate. We are ending with our tax fund balances at $74.6 million. And I want to be clear that not all of that money is available for general fund. Monies that are already designated cannot be considered as a part of your general fund, okay? And with that being said, we also have a proposed budget increase in the general fund of $76.3 million, or literally of 75%. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. T.J. Siegler and allow him to walk you through the budget, and also, again, just express my gratitude to him for working with me so that we were able to move so quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Just a few other highlights on the budget. So I think this is what Madam CEO was just referring to. This is our ending fund balance for the tax funds. And we always go back to 2010 on this chart, just because if you look in 2010, the county was in very dire financial situation. where we ended the year with a negative fund balance for the tax funds. So it was almost negative $4 million. Since that time, we've recovered, but one of the issues we're dealing with now is, as we said, the general fund balance has decreased. And so the goal there is to get us back to, well, really, up to 4 months of reserves, which would be the highest reserve level that the county has ever had. So that is a goal for us to pursue over the next 4 years. It's going to be take some doing, but we're on top of it. Some of the other items that are funded through the proposed budget, so there's $2 million to fund a real-time crime technology center. So that's one of the big priorities, obviously, is public safety, and we think that's going to be a valuable tool for law enforcement. The watershed management budget, I'm sure you all have heard about the proposed rate increases. So for the budget, we're assuming that 10% increase would be effective starting July 1st. Obviously, if that changes, we'll have to look to see what effect that will have on the proposed budget. The hospital fund, which is one of the tax funds that helps to fund Grady Memorial Healthcare System, is increasing by $6 million as well. And that's part of the new operating agreement that the county entered into with Grady, I believe, 2 years ago. And then the sanitation fund also has an increase, mostly related to vehicle replacement charges that were suspended for 1 year last year. Okay, something else a little bit different in this year's budget is there are very, very limited amounts of capital funding recommended. And the reason for that is we're going through the process now of trying to develop a 5-year capital improvement plan. So we have a committee which is made up of administrative staff to review all the requests for capital improvement projects and come up with a holistic, comprehensive capital improvement plan, which is something that hasn't been done in at least 8 years, perhaps longer for the county. And so what is proposed within the budget right now is $7.9 million for CIP projects. So we anticipate that number is going to be higher, but what we're going to be doing through that capital improvement plan committee is looking at all our funding sources, not just our operating fund, because the county also has capital improvement funds, especially SPLOST is our largest source of capital improvement funding, which is outside of the annual budget. Okay, so just to go over the process for this year, there were a few things that were different. One, obviously, Madam CEO already mentioned, is that as a new CEO, the deadline for submitting the budget was pushed back from December 15th to January 15th. But even with that later submission date, that only left us less than 2 weeks, really, to develop a budget recommendation for the Board of Commissioners. Something else that was different this year is we introduced a new budgeting software program called OpenGov. So it was the first time that we've used that internally to create the budget. And also what that allows us to do is the budget now, you can go online and there's an interactive version of the budget where you can view things. There's still the old-fashioned PDF of the budget as well. But we think that's going to really help improve the transparency of the budget. And we're going to be rolling out new features with OpenGov coming up as well. So the process, as Madam CEO mentioned, did kick off last fall in terms of asking departments for their request. And so we started that in October of last year, and we tried to do that in phases. And so we asked for departments to submit everything by November 15th. Then, as we said, the beginning of the year is when Madam CEO took office, and then by January 15th is when we had to present the budget to the Board of Commissioners. And so we've done a couple presentations to the Board of Commissioners through their Finance, Audit, and Budget Committee. We also had a public hearing on the budget last, I guess it was a week ago, Tuesday. And now we're having this public hearing, or this town hall on the budget. We'll also be doing it again on the 24th at Porter Sanford for the other, during the other public hearing on opting out of the homestead exemption, floating homestead exemption. And then we'll have the final public hearing on it during the Board of Commissioners meeting on the 25th. And that's also when the adoption of the budget is scheduled. Okay, and these are just some charts or some graphs to show what the budget looks like. So these are our tax funds. And so our tax funds are just one portion of the budget, but it's one that, you know, a lot of attention is paid to because it funds probably the majority of our services, and it's also what affects your property taxes. So that green part of the pie, that is our general fund, which is the largest tax fund, and that funds county-wide services. So anything like the court system, the sheriff's office, administrative functions of the county, that's what that funding is for. And so that's a tax fund, so there is a property tax millage rate associated with it that's paid by everyone in the county, regardless of whether you're unincorporated or you live in a city. The second largest portion of the tax fund budget is in green there, and that is our police fund. And so that is not countywide, so it depends on what city you live in and whether they decide to participate in that property tax or not. In general, most cities do not, except for non-basic services, which would be things like the aerial unit for the police departments, or helicopters, any sort of specialized units. But mostly the funding from that comes from unincorporated, as well as Tucker and Stonecrest, because they also use our police department. The third largest portion of it there is the fire fund in red. And that is countywide with the exceptions of City of Atlanta and City of Decatur, because they have their own fire departments. And then the other items includes the hospital fund. That's at 3% there. That's the, I guess, I don't know what color you call it, so another shade of red. And that is another countywide tax fund, so everyone in the county would pay that. And then the unincorporated fund is strictly for unincorporated. And unlike the others, it doesn't have a millage rate associated with it. All the revenue comes from different sources that are strictly in the unincorporated fund. And then designated services is the last tax fund, which that funds our parks system, as well as roads and drainage and transportation. And again, that's mostly unincorporated DeKalb. There are, I guess, Stonecrest still participates in that as well, but those are the only two areas that are covered through the designated services fund, and really that's only for the transportation portion of that. Okay, I know that this table is very small, so it's hard to see, but this just shows what the projected fund balance was at the beginning of the year, what our revenues are and our expenses, and then how we think we'll end the year in terms of our reserves. So what you see there is we started the year with a projected fund balance of $118 million, and we're planning to end the year with $137 million. So, and that would be 1.7 months of operating expenditures. So, as I said, you know, to get to the 4 months, we have some work to do, but that is the goal. All right, this is just comparing the budget to last year. And this, I think, illustrates what we've been talking about, that there's very few changes, and this is a fairly flat budget. In that, you know, we are expecting that there will be changes, there will be amendments throughout the year as we go through some of these studies and exercises that we're doing to really evaluate county operations and see what the needs are. But overall, the 2024 budget was $1.8 billion. And we're slightly below 1.8 this year, so $1.79 billion. So about a 1.25% decrease overall in the annual budget. Okay, this chart shows our tax digest. And so if you're unfamiliar with that term, what that is the total amount of taxable property within the county. So this is what drives a lot of our revenue estimates for the year. And so the blue part there is the gross tax digest. So that's the 40% assessed value for all properties. And the green is the net. And so the net takes that gross value and subtracts out all the exemptions. So everything we were talking about this morning about the floating homestead exemption or the property assessment freeze, all that is what is taken out from the blue to get you to the green. And so that's really the number that we focus on, because that's what determines, what we're able to tax and what that drives our revenue. Right, and this is just showing the same thing, but the annual percent change. And so we're being fairly conservative in our projections for the digest this year. If you look at those dashed lines across, those are the average increase over the last, I guess that's maybe 9 years there. And so you'll see that the gross tax digest on average has grown 9.4%, and the net tax digest has grown 7.9%. For this year, we're only projecting the gross digest to grow at 2.8%. You'll see that the net tax digest is actually at 3.6%. The reason for that is just we didn't make any adjustments to the exemptions in our projections, so this is a fairly simple projection. And by the time we get to the summer and we're voting on the millage rates, we'll have the actual digest numbers. And again, that will be really what kind of drives what we are able to do this year in terms of the budget. All right, this is, again, just a link to our budget office website. So this is the same link that was in the earlier presentation. But if you go here, you can find the links to the budget online, so the interactive budget as well as the PDF. We have the presentations that we've been giving at these meetings as well. And there's information going back, probably several decades about the budget. If you're ever really bored, you can go back and read that. So, but yeah, there's really a lot of information out there. So if you have questions or there's anything you're interested in, I would recommend checking out that website. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And at this time, I will ask, are there any questions concerning the budget as it's presented? And feel free, let me say to you that there's a lot here. And it took me quite some time as a new commissioner back in 2019 to unpackage it all. Because there's a lot here. But so if there's questions that arise later, feel free to just zip us an email or reach out.
Okay,
Yes,
so,
sir.
I live in the Shadow Rock subdivision off of Shadow Rock Road. I'm a board member also. We had the Splosh come and do our main road that goes into the subdivision. Mm-hmm. They only did 1,000 feet. We only got a splash of the splosh, kind of. I want to see if when you do implement these funds, that they can do a project in totalitarian ways instead of doing just a piecemeal. See, I don't mind our next subdivision next to us getting their whole subdivision repaved roads, as long as they get it done in its entirety. We don't need to be spending money like this in just kind of a piecemeal. They only did 1,000 feet of road within our subdivision. We don't need that. We need a project that is in total, that takes care of all the roads when they're implementing these funds. Thanks.
Understood. And let me explain how we determine what portions of road are resurfaced. If you go to the DeKalb County website, DeKalbCountyGA.gov, and click, as soon as you go, you're going to see a penny, and we call him Joe Penny. And that's the penny you pay in SPLOST. So it will carry you over to the SPLOST website. And I want to be really clear, DeKalb County is behind because for 30 years, the enabling legislation that permitted SPLOST, which is the special purpose local option sales tax, that now generates, our first cycle generated over 700 million. We are on target. We rolled out last year our second SPLOST. And SPLOST is a 6-year period. And over this 6 years, we're estimated to generate over 800 million. And that is the money that we now use for those capital improvements. So for 30 years, when the option was there, DeKalb County had not taken to referendum the penny that we now have. So across DeKalb, we've had a lot of delayed maintenance because you can't do more than you have. And we've talked about tax digest, and that's based on your property values. but that penny has been instrumental. So with that penny, as we say, during the first 6 years, we were on SPLOST with training wheels. The delegation required under the General Assembly that 85% of what we received was used only for capital improvements, so primarily your roads and infrastructure. The other 15% was used for your libraries and building of vertical structures. So some of you have seen we were able to develop 5 different fire stations out of those funds. But now, previous to 2017, commissioners decided which roads were going to be resurfaced and what infrastructure was addressed. But with SPLOST, we adopted the model that was being used by Cobb, Gwinnett, City of Atlanta, other jurisdictions. And now, at the top of each year, DeKalb County has 2,200 miles of highway. We give a grade to all 2,200. Once those numbers come in, the higher the number, the worse the road. We go directly to the top of that list each year and we work down. So whatever, and I'd like to believe, because unless there is some extenuating and mitigating circumstances, that's the only list that's used. So that road would have been approved for resurfacing. Now, if you go there on the website, you'll see green, yellow, and red. Everything green has already been resurfaced. Everything in yellow is currently in progress, and all things that are red, all roads are red, and you can put in your address and it'll tell you, has been approved for resurfacing, but the work is not yet begun. So we will, during any given year, what you see there is the entire project list for 2025 at this moment. But what I will do, I have here the Shadow Rock subdivision. 1,000 feet is what you say. I'm going to walk it down for you. We will make sure that J.P. Phillips gets your information. But, you know, oftentimes we get the calls because you will see, and to be honest, there has been some situations where it looks like a checkerboard. And I understand when people call because it does not appear reasonable. But let me understand why only that segment was resurfaced, because also it's very important that you know that it takes a lot of coordination with us because we are still under consent decree to expand, replace, and enlarge infrastructure. And much of our infrastructure runs along and under roads. We have some really major projects that are coming up where we have to go under interstate highway to expand our water lines. And with that said, sometimes it may not make sense to you, but because we know that there's a separate project that comes, we hold off in some areas because it all has to be coordinated in conjunction sometimes with GDOT and other agencies because of the long-term work that we're doing with Watershed 2. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. Well, we are over time, but I thank you. And if you're registered, you'll be receiving this presentation. We're going to email it to you in the newsletter. And please feel free to share it, forward it on to your neighbors, because I want as many people in DeKalb to be knowledgeable about what you're seeing and what's going on. We appreciate you. We on this side of the aisle will do everything we can to ensure that there's no adverse consequences for DeKalb County residents. I know that today we haven't made any promises with HB581, and I do urge you to reach out to your commissioners because when it comes to HB581, I do not vote. I'm no longer, I do not have the ability to raise the hand. So if you feel strongly about a particular outcome, I do believe that we're all of the same mindset here in terms of what we see. So I do expect that we'll be fine. But again, feel free to reach out to your commissioners, and thank you all so much for coming this morning.